Let me tell you about the day the Interdimensional Library nearly went supernova because two ancient deities decided to have a cosmic slap fight over the light switch. This is not metaphor. This is not exaggeration. But this is a very normal occurrence when you run the goofiest eldritch library that has ever existed in all possible timelines and caters to gods, ghosts, semi-sapient pastries, and at least one chair that recites Shakespeare backwards. The day began, innocently enough, with Nyx. Yes, that Nyx. Primordial Greek goddess of night. The original shadow. The metaphysical equivalent of sighing in a Victorian hallway. She drifted into the library like a spilled glass of obsidian, humming what I can only describe as a lullaby, written by existential dread and arranged by Edgar Allan Poe's ghost. She left a trail of flickering candles and unread poetry in her wake, and every intern within 30 feet spontaneously developed a soft spot for doomed romances. She wanted ambiance. Of course she did. So she turned off every single light in the library. With a wave of her hand, she extinguished not just physical illumination, but the concept of lighting itself. The chandeliers drooped like ashamed ghosts. The sconces quietly wept. The emergency backlights filed a formal protest with HR and then fell over. We plunged into a darkness so rich it filed taxes, so dense it developed its own ecosystem. Something began blooming in the reference wing, and I do not want to know what it feeds on. The cookbooks began glowing from sheer confusion, unsure whether they were being read or reincarnated. Dewey, our noble AI pilot, interdimensional navigator, and reluctant emotional support algorithm, panicked. He recalibrated, misread the visual data stream, and flew us into a star, not symbolically, physically. He attempted to justify it as an intentional sunbathing maneuver. I told him if I wanted the library toasted, I'd throw it in an oven set to hubris. Do you know how hard it is to parallel park a transdimensional sanctuary in solar plasma, while a goddess reads Rimbaud in the dark and refuses to be disturbed? I know it very well. I had to reroute power manually using a half-melted emergency lever, a ritual chant scribbled on the back of a coffee filter, and Greg the Centaur intern, who has now developed a light allergy, a deep mistrust of metaphysics, and a complex relationship with candles. Eventually, I managed to stabilize us using a triangulated focus of librarian rage, 3 expired metaphors, and an unopened copy of Eat, Pray, Burn. The lights returned, gently. The books stopped whispering. Nyx reclined onto a chaise lounge that did not exist before she entered the room, possibly woven from sadness and tax evasion, and proceeded to read upside down, as is her cursed right. I was this close to a nap, this close. That small, sacred moment of silence before the next disaster. A sacred window between trauma and caffeine. And then, Ra walked in. Ra, Egyptian god of the sun. Solar narcissist. Walking photosynthesis tantrum. He entered the library like a high beam on a migraine. A fanfare of trumpets blared uninvited. Golden light spilled into the aisles, bleaching several rare tomes and at least one intern. His chariot screeched to a halt, sideswiping the metaphysics aisle and knocking ontology for dummies into a smoldering pile of paradox. He struck a pose. He smiled like dawn had been personally invented to flatter him. And then he said, "Hello, library! Why is it so gloomy in here? Someone die? Again?" "Yes, Ra. my patience. It died. It died surrounded by books, whispering your name like a curse. Before I could even shout, "No!" Before Dewey could raise his voice in machine protest, Ra had found the Master Light Override. Now, for the uninitiated, the Master Light Override is not so much a switch as it is a cosmic dare. It was installed during a pan-deific staff party by the Architect of Paradox after 3 bottles of divine champagne and a bet with Kronos. The button is labeled "Do not press unless you have no regard for metaphysical consequences." Ra pressed it with the glee of a toddler discovering an unattended fireworks display. The library became a supernova cosplay convention. Shelves began glowing. Books started tanning. The self-help section achieved enlightenment, screamed, and exploded into glittering fragments of personal growth. Every intern spontaneously produced sunglasses. The poetry wing melted into iambic goo, and Ra beamed. Literally. He flung his arms wide and shouted, "You're welcome," as if he had just personally ended climate change. Enter Nyx. Again. She arrived not with footsteps, but with the sudden absence of certainty. The shadows slithered back. The floor dimmed. Temperature dropped like a philosophical punchline. She glared at Ra like he'd just unmoored gravity. "What is this?" Her voice was velvet and venom. Her eyes were full eclipses. The ceiling began weeping ink. Ra, still shining like a sentient floodlight, spread his arms. "Fixed your lighting problem." Nyx stared. A pause so pregnant it required prenatal care. "You wounded the concept of night," she said. "You're being dramatic. This is a library, not a haunted jazz bar. I am drama, you solar sugar packet. And I am the dawn, you sentient curtain." They bickered. No, they drooled with dialect. Nyx called Ra a glorified tanning bed with delusions of omniscience. Ra called Nyx a misunderstood inkblot with a fanbase. Nyx whispered in Proto-Greek and made Ra's shadow cry. Ra quoted his own myths until the fourth wall twitched. Meanwhile, Dewey began spinning in quiet despair. Then, because fate is not a lady, but a raccoon with a grudge, Voidmonger appeared. He slithered out of the lower archives like a tax form soaked in brimstone. His eyes glinted with entrepreneurial chaos. His briefcase emitted low-level hunger. He sniffed the air with practiced greed. "Oh, radiant surplus," he purred. "Someone's been overspending in the illumination department. Chestopher's going to love this." Now, for the uninitiated, Chestopher is a mimic, but not just any mimic. He is a cosmic mimic, a shape-shifting anomaly originally disguised as a reading Ottoman, who now serves as Voidmonger's sentient interdimensional vacuum cleaner. He looks like a chair, until you get close. Then he opens a mouth full of black hole, sucks in light, sound, meaning, and occasionally interns, and ejects it through a corresponding white hole somewhere across the multiverse. He once swallowed the word napkin, and 37 restaurants collapsed in linguistic confusion. Another time he ate a logic puzzle, and half the philosophy department ascended. And now, with Ra's light flooding every aisle, and Nyx screaming in gothic Morse code, Chestopher arrived. He skittered in on too many legs. His tongue lolled out like a surrealist oil painting. His mouth, when it opened, was hunger made geometric. He inhaled, and I mean that cosmically. The chandelier vanished. A sunbeam twisted and disappeared. Ra's left sandal was absorbed mid-flex. Somewhere in the epic section, a time traveler shouted, Not again. I had to intervene. I rose. I grew. I shed my humanoid form and ascended into a 12-story amalgam of resentment, robes, and unread grant proposals. My eyes burned with the fury of overdue fines. My voice bent the Dewey Decimal System into a Mobius strip. Enough! The world paused. Chestopher sat, wagged, spat out the sandal. Nyx folded her arms in smug obsidian. Ra crossed his arms and began glowing in passive-aggressive Morse code. Voidmonger took notes and attempted to invoice the sun, and so began the negotiation. Ra gets exactly 8 minutes of radiant influence daily in the citrus reference alcove. Nyx gets full dominion from 11 p.m. onward, excluding the coffee vestibule. Chestopher is banned from luminous zones unless muzzled in a shadow leash made from metaphor. Voidmonger is fined 3 units of poetic justice and 1 glowing toe. The library dimmed, stabilized, sighed, and I, Cthulhu, eternal administrator of this sanctum of sorrow and narrative integrity, sat down, sipped tea made of stellar melancholy, and began paperwork to take both Nyx and Ra to divine court, starring myself as both judge and prosecutor. Indeed, you heard that right. Let the record show that I, Cthulhu, head librarian of the interdimensional repository of all that should not be remembered, and some things that really shouldn't be filed alphabetically, hereby summoned a divine tribunal under authority statute infinity by pi, by omega of the divine oversight committee, which, as fate would have it, I chair. Because when you run a sacred multiversal library and 2 gods decide to turn it into a light switch slap fight, you don't request order. You enforce it. The crime, tampering with the sanctity of library ambiance, assault with a radiant metaphor, and perhaps most heinously, enabling Voidmonger to unleash Chestopher upon a lighting situation so calorically incandescent it qualified as a snack. And so it began. The first official court of Ambiance violations, convened within the Grand Indexing Hall, converted hastily into a courtroom using a gavel-shaped thunderclap, 3 stacks of law books, and a jury box full of sentient footnotes wearing bifocals. I sat upon the bench of binding clauses, a chair so heavy with bureaucratic symbolism it bends gravity. My robe, ink black, threaded with the regrets of lesser demigods, billowed despite the absence of wind. Dewey hovered at my side, manifesting legal citations and glowing air sigils while quietly panicking in old Latin. To my left, the prosecution, also me. Because when gods commit ambiance crimes in my library, I get to be both the scorned party and the person deciding the punishment. It's called multitasking, and it's why no one's allowed to question my job title anymore. To my right, the accused, Nyx, goddess of night, seated, no, draped, upon a summoned void throne shaped like an uncomfortable sigh. She wore tenebrous couture and the facial expression of a barista forced to explain espresso to a man with a podcast. Ra, god of the sun, standing upright and glowing like a motivational calendar, came to life. He shimmered with arrogant daylight, his sandals humming with unsubtle brass undertones. Voidmonger loitered near the gallery, hiding behind his portable merchandise stand. Chestopher lay curled at his feet, mimicking a fainting couch and drooling photons onto the floor. This tribunal, I announced, my voice shaking the architecture into silence, is called to order. The charge: reckless manipulation of photonic ambiance, illegal interpantheon escalation, and unauthorized mimic baiting in a designated archival sanctuary. Nyx yawned. Ra breathed. I did not sigh. I catalogued my irritation. Prosecution, call your witnesses. I'd like to begin, I said, standing up and gesturing to myself, by submitting myself as the first and primary witness, because I was there, because I saw it, because it happened in my damn reading room. I turned to the jury of floating punctuation marks, all scribbling in disapproval. Ladies, gentlemen, intertextual entities, I give you Exhibit A. Nyx turns off the lights to set the mood, which in her vocabulary translates to obliterate all visibility and collapse the concept of photosynthesis. Nyx waved a lazy hand. Shadows arched. The gallery briefly flickered into grayscale. I simply wish to read quietly, she said, voice like velvet stretched over a monolith. Some of us enjoy the soul of a sentence, not just its spectacle. You plunged Dewey into photonic shock, I countered. He rerouted the entire library into a Class G star. Dewey shivered and beat in post-traumatic starlight. I turned to Ra, and then you. You burst in like a heat wave at a funeral. You found the Master Light Override, which is labeled in 17 languages with the phrase "do not touch unless you are ready to die" a theme, and you touched it. Ra lifted his chin, radiating smug. The place was a crypt. I brought warmth, clarity, the golden kiss of comprehension. I elevated literacy to solar levels. You ignited the suspense isle, I deadpanned. Several mysteries resolved themselves out of fear. Nyx snorted. Your illumination gave 3 interns migraines and one of them religious insight. You overbaked the ambience. Better than drowning it in gloom, Ra snapped. At least I didn't make the cookbook start weeping. At least I don't tan paperbacks. Your lighting is a form of literary gaslighting. Your presence qualifies as narrative arson. You're a mood board for depression. You're a vitamin commercial with a god complex. Enough! I thundered, and the rafters complied. I pressed a sigil. The floor opened with ritual smoothness. Let us review the event, I declared, summoning the reenactment from the memory vault. A projection unfolded, woven from mnemonic fog and archived narrative strands. We saw it all again. Nyx entering in dramatic grayscale, curling around the philosophy section like a sigh. Ra blazing in like disco sunstroke, triggering photonic chaos. Chestopher erupting from under Voidmonger's merchandise booth, and devouring half the atrium's lighting grid like it was nachos. The books screaming, the shadows hissing, the poetry wing speaking in tongues. It was, in short, a celestial dumpster fire staged as interpretive theater. I paused the projection. Let the record show that Chestopher, who I remind the court, is a mimic with a black hole for a throat, was summoned by the sheer audacity of their lighting duel. Nyx rolled her eyes. I didn't summon the mimic, he just arrived. You summoned atmosphere. Mimics feed on metaphor. Chestopher was sniffing a buffet of badly managed tone. Voidmonger attempted to object, but a jury semicolon threw a book at him. Your Honor, Ra said, tone slick with PR desperation. Surely we can agree that light brings knowledge. What's a little overexposure in pursuit of divine clarity? Divine clarity doesn't involve setting fire to the reference wing, I replied. You turned a metaphor into a wildfire. I'm a sun god. Fire is in the job description. You are not an interior decorator. Nyx smirked. Perhaps we should ban egos over 5,000 lumens. Perhaps we should ban anyone who enters a library with a fog machine and a tragic backstory. I held up my hand. I have heard enough. The jury floated upward, forming a constellation of closing remarks. I stood, tall and terrible, the sleeves of my robe swirling with unread legal amendments. Nix, Ra, you are both guilty of tampering with library ambience in the first degree. Your testimonies have confirmed not only your utter disregard for spatial lighting protocol, but your weaponization of aesthetic sensibility for petty cosmic drama. This tribunal finds you both insufferable and liable. Ra crossed his arms. Nix began braiding shadows into a passive-aggressive crown. Your sentence, I continued, is as follows. You will co-author a 500-page Ambiance compliance manual with alternating chapters, no ghostwriters, and mandatory tone-matching footnotes. It will be used to retrain all divine visitors for the next 10,000 years. The gallery gasped. Voidmonger tried to sell copies. Furthermore, I added, glaring at Chestopher, this mimic is now banned from ambient zones. You may feed him only under candlelight, and while supervised by Madeline or a licensed archivist. Chestopher whined. And finally, I turned to Voidmonger. Return the glowing toe. You'll never prove I took it, he said. I pressed a button. A projection of him stealing the toe appeared. Okay, but you'll never prove it emotionally. The toe was retrieved. The trial adjourned. And I returned to my chair, my tea, my sense of barely contained disdain. Justice was served, slightly overlit, a little undercooked, but garnished with the truth. And no one tampers with my library's lighting without consequences, even if they invented half the metaphors in it. Even if they invented half the metaphors in it.